In the smoke-filled streets of a war-torn city, where every shadow could hide death and every sound might be your last, sometimes the difference between coming home and never seeing your family again comes down to one person's courage. This is the story of Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez, a military sniper whose steady hands and unwavering determination turned what should have been a massacre into a miracle. When 12 soldiers found themselves trapped in a building surrounded by enemy forces, with ammunition running low and hope fading fast, it was Maria's rifle that spoke the language of survival. Her story isn't just about war. It's about the split-second decisions that define heroes, the weight of responsibility that comes with holding lives in your hands, and how one woman's refusal to abandon her brothers in arms changed everything in those final, desperate minutes when death seemed certain. Maria Vasquez had never imagined that the dusty streets of her childhood neighborhood would prepare her for the urban warfare she now faced halfway across the world. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she learned to move quietly through alleys where gang territories shifted like the tide, where survival meant keeping your head down and your eyes open. Now, at 28, those same instincts served her as one of the military's most skilled snipers, though the stakes had grown far deadlier than anything her teenage years had thrown at her. The mission that would define her legacy began on a sweltering Tuesday morning in the contested city of Fallujah. Intelligence reports had indicated that a high-value target was operating from a 3-story building in the heart of what locals called the Red Zone, an area so dangerous that even veteran soldiers approached it with extreme caution. The building sat at the intersection of 2 major streets, surrounded by a maze of narrow alleyways and rooftops that provided perfect cover for enemy snipers and improvised explosive devices. Maria's unit, the 2nd Battalion, had been tasked with clearing the building and capturing or eliminating the target. It should have been a straightforward operation, the kind they had executed dozens of times before. The plan called for a swift entry, room-by-room clearing, and extraction within 2 hours. Maria's role was to provide overwatch from a position 300 meters away, using her Barrett M107 rifle to neutralize any threats that emerged from the surrounding buildings. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows between the concrete structures, Maria settled into her position on the roof of an abandoned pharmacy. She had arrived under cover of darkness, spending hours preparing her nest with the meticulous care that had kept her alive through countless missions. Her rifle was zeroed perfectly, her ammunition counted and arranged within easy reach. Through her scope, she could see every window, every doorway, every potential hiding spot around the target building. The assault team consisted of 12 soldiers led by Captain James Rodriguez, a decorated officer who had earned his men's respect through 2 previous tours of duty. Among them was Sergeant Mike Thompson, a medic whose steady hands had saved more lives than anyone could count, and Corporal David Kim, a communications specialist whose technical skills had proved invaluable in urban operations. These weren't just soldiers to Maria. They were brothers who had shared meals, fears, and hopes during the long months of deployment. At exactly 0600 hours, the operation began. Maria watched through her scope as the team approached the building, moving in practiced formation along the wall. Captain Rodriguez signaled the breach, and within seconds the soldiers had disappeared inside. For the first 30 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. Radio chatter was minimal but professional, indicating steady progress through the lower floors. Then, everything went wrong. The explosion came without warning, a thunderous blast that shook the ground beneath Maria's position and sent a plume of smoke and debris high into the air. Through her scope, she watched in horror as the building's entrance collapsed, sealing her teammates inside. Before she could process what had happened, muzzle flashes began appearing in windows throughout the surrounding buildings. The operation had been a trap, and her unit was now caught in a carefully orchestrated ambush. Enemy fighters emerged from concealment like ants from a disturbed nest. Maria could see at least 20 hostiles taking positions in buildings that had appeared empty just moments before. They moved with the confidence of men who knew the terrain intimately, setting up firing positions that would allow them to pour devastating fire into the trapped building. It became clear that someone had leaked intelligence about the operation, turning what should have been a surprise assault into a death trap. Maria's radio crackled to life with Captain Rodriguez's voice, tense but controlled despite the desperate situation. The team was trapped on the 2nd floor, he reported, with the stairwell blocked by debris and enemy fighters controlling the ground floor. Several soldiers were wounded, including Sergeant Thompson, who had taken shrapnel in his left arm but was still treating other casualties. The ammunition was limited, and the building's windows provided minimal protection against the increasingly accurate enemy fire. From her elevated position, Maria could see the tactical nightmare her teammates faced. The enemy had positioned themselves in a perfect crossfire pattern, covering every possible exit from the building. Sniper teams in the surrounding structures had clear fields of fire on the windows where her unit was trapped, making any attempt to return fire extremely dangerous. It was a textbook example of urban warfare tactics executed with ruthless precision. As the minutes ticked by, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Enemy reinforcements were arriving, taking positions that would allow them to assault the building once they had suppressed the trapped soldiers. Maria counted at least 30 hostiles now, with more arriving every few minutes. Her teammates were outnumbered 3-1, low on ammunition and running out of time. The radio chatter grew more urgent as Captain Rodriguez coordinated his men's defense. Corporal Kim was working frantically to establish communication with headquarters and request immediate air support, but the urban environment made it difficult for aircraft to distinguish between friendly and enemy positions. The nearest friendly ground units were at least an hour away, engaged in their own operations across the city. Maria realized that she was the only thing standing between her teammates and certain death. From her position, she had clear lines of sight to many of the enemy positions, but engaging them would immediately reveal her location and draw fire that her single-person position couldn't withstand for long. She would have to be precise, methodical, and above all, patient. Every shot would need to count, because there might not be many opportunities for misses. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. 12 lives depended on her skills, her judgment, and her ability to remain calm under the most extreme pressure imaginable. These weren't just statistics or mission objectives. They were men she had served with, laughed with, and who trusted her to watch their backs. The bonds forged in combat ran deeper than family ties, and abandoning them was not an option she would even consider. As enemy fire intensified around the trapped building, Maria began to methodically identify her targets. She prioritized the most dangerous threats first, focusing on enemy snipers whose accurate fire was pinning down her teammates. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different sniper positions, each one representing a deadly threat to any of her unit who dared to show themselves at a window. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and with it the temperature began to rise. Sweat beaded on Maria's forehead despite the early hour, partly from the heat but mostly from the intense concentration required for precision shooting under combat conditions. Every breath had to be controlled, every heartbeat timed to the trigger pull. The margin for error was 0, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. Her first target presented itself as a sniper in a window approximately 200 meters to the northeast of the trapped building. Through her scope, she could see the distinctive outline of a rifle barrel protruding from behind a makeshift barrier. The shot would be challenging due to the angle and the partial concealment, but it was necessary to reduce the pressure on her teammates. Maria controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the focused state that separated expert marksmen from the merely competent. The crosshairs settled on the target, accounting for wind speed, distance, and the slight upward angle of the shot. Her finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure until the rifle bucked against her shoulder with its familiar authority. Through the scope, she watched the enemy sniper's position go silent, the rifle barrel disappearing back into the shadows. One threat eliminated, but dozens more remained. The enemy fighters seemed to realize they were being engaged by a sniper, and several began scanning the rooftops, trying to locate Maria's position. She would have to move soon, but first, she needed to take advantage of their momentary confusion. Her second shot came 30 seconds later, targeting another sniper position in a building to the south. This shooter had been particularly aggressive, keeping up a steady rate of fire that was preventing her teammates from reaching better defensive positions. The bullet found its mark, and another threat was neutralized. The enemy response was swift and coordinated. Within minutes, at least 6 fighters were dedicating their attention to finding and eliminating the unknown sniper who was disrupting their ambush. Maria could see them moving between buildings, using hand signals to coordinate their search. Her position would be compromised soon, and she would need to relocate while continuing to provide cover for her trapped unit. The radio crackled again with Captain Rodriguez's voice, reporting that the enemy was preparing to assault the building. Through her scope, Maria could see fighters gathering in the alleyways, preparing to storm the structure from multiple directions. Once they gained access to the upper floors, the trapped soldiers would be overwhelmed by superior numbers. Time was running out, and the window for successful extraction was closing rapidly. Maria made a tactical decision that would have been considered reckless by any military manual, but was necessary given the desperate circumstances. Instead of relocating to preserve her own safety, she would remain in position and engage as many targets as possible before her location was compromised. Every enemy fighter she could eliminate would improve her teammates' chances of survival, even if it meant sacrificing her own safety. The third shot was the most difficult yet, targeting an enemy fighter who was directing the assault preparations from a partially concealed position behind a concrete barrier. The shot required precise placement to avoid the cover while still ensuring a clean hit. Maria's breathing steadied, her world narrowing to the small circle of the scope's view, and she squeezed the trigger with the same methodical precision that had made her one of the military's most feared snipers. As her teammates continued their desperate defense, Maria began what would become one of the most remarkable displays of precision shooting in modern military history. Each shot was calculated, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. She was no longer just a sniper providing overwatch, she had become the guardian angel watching over 12 trapped soldiers, the silent protector whose rifle would determine whether they lived to see another day. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows between the buildings as Maria continued her deadly work. Each shot from her Barrett rifle echoed through the urban canyon like thunder, followed by the distinctive crack of the bullet breaking the sound barrier. By now the enemy knew they were being hunted by a skilled marksman, but they couldn't pinpoint her exact location due to the acoustic properties of the surrounding buildings. Maria had eliminated 7 enemy fighters in the first 20 minutes of the engagement, but her ammunition supply was not infinite. She carried 40 rounds for the Barrett, and each shot had to count. More troubling was the growing enemy response to her intervention. What had started as an ambush of her trapped teammates was evolving into a coordinated effort to locate and eliminate her position. Through her scope, she watched as enemy fighters began using mirrors and other reflective objects to scan the rooftops, a technique that could eventually reveal her location. Others were moving in small teams, leapfrogging between buildings as they worked their way toward her general area. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Maria knew that her time in this position was limited. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio again, providing a grim status update. 3 soldiers were now wounded, with Sergeant Thompson's condition worsening due to blood loss from his shrapnel injuries. The medic was treating himself with one hand while continuing to provide medical care to the others, a testament to the dedication that characterized these elite soldiers. Ammunition was running critically low, with most team members down to their last magazine. The trapped soldiers had managed to establish a defensive perimeter on the second floor, using overturned furniture and debris to create makeshift cover. However, their position was becoming increasingly untenable as enemy fire intensified. Bullets punched through the thin walls with frightening regularity, sending concrete dust and splinters flying through the air. It was only a matter of time before the enemy fighters managed to breach the building's defenses. Maria adjusted her position slightly, seeking a better angle on a group of enemy fighters who were preparing to assault the building's rear entrance. Through her scope, she could see 4 men armed with assault rifles and grenades, moving with the confident coordination of experienced urban fighters. They had identified a weakness in her teammates' defenses and were preparing to exploit it. The shot was complicated by the angle and the partial concealment provided by a concrete wall. Maria would need to time her shot precisely, waiting for the lead fighter to move into a small gap that would provide a clear line of fire. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the focused state that allowed for impossible shots under extreme pressure. The target appeared in her crosshairs for less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. The bullet found its mark, and the assault team immediately scattered, seeking cover and abandoning their planned attack. One threat neutralized, but Maria knew that others would take their place. The enemy had seemingly unlimited reinforcements, while her teammates were growing weaker with each passing minute. As if summoned by her thoughts, her radio crackled with Corporal Kim's voice reporting that he had managed to establish contact with headquarters. Air support was en route, but the earliest estimated arrival time was 45 minutes. In urban combat, 45 minutes might as well be 45 hours. Her teammates needed help now, not in 3/4 of an hour. The tactical situation continued to evolve as enemy fighters adapted to Maria's presence. Instead of presenting themselves as individual targets, they began moving in larger groups, using suppressive fire to cover their advances. This made Maria's job significantly more difficult, as she could only engage one target at a time while multiple threats maneuvered simultaneously. She shifted her focus to the most dangerous immediate threat, a machine gun team that had established a position in a 3rd-story window with a direct line of sight to the building where her teammates were trapped. The heavy weapon could punch through their improvised cover with ease, turning their defensive position into a killing ground. The machine gun had to be silenced before it could open fire. The shot required precise placement, as the gunner was partially concealed behind the weapon's metal shield. Maria waited patiently, knowing that the gunner would eventually expose himself enough to present a viable target. Combat was often about patience as much as skill, and rushing a shot could mean missing entirely. When the opportunity came, Maria was ready. The bullet struck with devastating effect, silencing the machine gun permanently and sending the remaining crew scrambling for cover. However, the effort to eliminate this threat had consumed precious time, and she could see that enemy fighters were closing in on her teammates' building from multiple directions. The radio chatter became increasingly urgent as Captain Rodriguez coordinated his men's defense against what appeared to be the final assault. Enemy fighters were now moving openly in the streets, confident that their superior numbers would overwhelm the trapped soldiers. Maria could count at least 20 hostiles preparing for the coordinated attack, far more than her teammates could handle in their weakened condition. It was then that Maria made a decision that would define the rest of the engagement. Instead of continuing to engage targets methodically, she would create chaos among the enemy ranks by rapid, aggressive shooting. The goal was not necessarily to achieve perfect precision, but to disrupt the enemy's coordination and buy her teammates precious time to improve their defensive positions. Her rifle began speaking with increased frequency, the distinctive crack of each shot echoing through the urban landscape. Enemy fighters dove for cover as bullets began finding their marks with deadly precision. Maria was operating in what marksmen called the zone, a state of heightened awareness where time seemed to slow and every shot felt guided by instinct as much as training. The enemy assault faltered as their carefully planned coordination collapsed under the sudden increase in sniper fire. Fighters who had been moving confidently toward the building suddenly found themselves pinned down, unsure of where the next shot would come from. The psychological effect of accurate sniper fire was often as devastating as the physical damage, and Maria was exploiting this weakness ruthlessly. However, her aggressive shooting was rapidly depleting her ammunition supply. Each shot brought her closer to the moment when her rifle would fall silent, leaving her teammates to face the remaining enemy fighters with whatever ammunition they had left. She had perhaps 15 rounds remaining, and each one would need to count more than ever. Through her scope, she identified what appeared to be the enemy commander, a figure directing the assault from a position behind a concrete barrier approximately 300 meters away. Eliminating him might disrupt the enemy's coordination long enough for her teammates to break out of their trapped position. The shot would be extremely challenging due to the distance, angle, and partial concealment, but it represented the best opportunity to change the tactical balance. Maria steadied her breathing, feeling the familiar calm that preceded her most difficult shots. The crosshairs settled on the barely visible target, accounting for the increased distance and the slight crosswind that had developed as the day progressed. Her finger found the trigger, applying the steady pressure that would send the bullet on its deadly journey. The shot was perfect, and the enemy commander disappeared from view. Almost immediately, Maria could see confusion spreading through the enemy ranks as fighters looked around for orders that were no longer coming. The coordinated assault began to fragment as individual units acted independently, creating gaps in their coverage that her teammates might be able to exploit. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with the first hopeful news in hours. The enemy assault had stalled, and his team was using the respite to redistribute ammunition and tend to their wounded. More importantly, they had identified a possible escape route through a window that faced away from the main enemy concentration. If they could reach the adjacent building, they might be able to establish a new defensive position and await the arrival of air support. However, the escape route was not without risks. The soldiers would need to traverse an exposed section of rooftop where enemy snipers could potentially engage them. Maria would need to provide precise cover fire to ensure their safe passage, but her ammunition was running dangerously low. She had perhaps 10 rounds left, and each shot would need to suppress or eliminate threats that could endanger her teammates during their escape attempt. The stakes had never been higher, and Maria knew that the next few minutes would determine whether her teammates lived or died. She had already performed beyond any reasonable expectation, but the most challenging part of the mission still lay ahead. As her teammates prepared to make their desperate break for freedom, Maria readied herself for the most important shooting of her life. The radio crackled once more as Captain Rodriguez announced that they were beginning their movement. 12 lives now hung in the balance, depending entirely on the accuracy of a young woman from East Los Angeles who had never imagined that her skills would be tested under such extreme circumstances. The silent protector was about to face her ultimate test. The moment Captain Rodriguez announced the beginning of their escape attempt, Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with life-or-death situations. Through her scope, she could see her teammates preparing to move, checking their gear one final time before committing to what might be their only chance at survival. The weight of their lives pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force, but her hands remained steady as she scanned for potential threats. The escape route required the soldiers to exit through a second-story window, traverse approximately 20 meters of exposed rooftop, and then enter an adjacent building through another window. The path would take them directly through the line of sight of at least 3 enemy sniper positions that Maria had identified earlier. Without precise cover fire, the movement would be suicide. Sergeant Thompson, despite his injuries, insisted on being the first to move. As the medic, he reasoned that his combat medical skills were too valuable to lose if the evacuation went wrong. Through her scope, Maria watched him appear at the window, pausing to assess the route ahead. The morning sun was now bright enough to cast sharp shadows, which would provide some concealment but also create dangerous blind spots where enemy fighters might be hiding. Maria had positioned her crosshairs on the nearest sniper position, a window approximately 200 meters northeast of the escape route. Intelligence suggested that an enemy marksman was stationed there, though he had remained hidden since her earlier shots had eliminated several of his comrades. The moment Thompson began his movement across the rooftop, this sniper would likely attempt to engage him. As Thompson launched himself from the window and began his sprint across the exposed rooftop, Maria's world narrowed to the circle of her scope. She could see movement in the sniper position, the barely perceptible shift of shadows that indicated someone was preparing to fire. Her breathing steadied, her heartbeat slowed, and her finger found the trigger with the practiced ease of thousands of training rounds. The enemy sniper's muzzle flash appeared in her scope just as she squeezed the trigger. Her bullet arrived a fraction of a second later, silencing the threat permanently. Thompson continued his sprint, unaware of how close he had come to death, and disappeared into the adjacent building's window. One soldier safely evacuated, 11 to go. Corporal Kim was next, moving with the quick, efficient movements of a soldier who understood that speed was life in such situations. Maria shifted her aim to another potential threat, an enemy fighter who had been trying to flank the escape route from the south. The target was partially concealed behind air conditioning equipment on a rooftop, presenting only occasional glimpses of his position. As Kim began his movement, the enemy fighter rose to take aim. Maria's shot caught him center mass, sending him tumbling backward out of view. Kim reached safety without incident, and Maria allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before focusing on the next potential threat. Her ammunition count was now down to 7 rounds, and 9 soldiers still needed to make the dangerous crossing. The next 2 soldiers moved together, using a buddy system that provided mutual support, but also presented a more tempting target for enemy fighters. Maria identified 3 potential threats along their route, each one representing a different angle of attack that could prove fatal. She would need to prioritize her shots carefully, as she couldn't eliminate all 3 threats before they had opportunities to fire. As the soldiers began their movement, Maria engaged the most immediate threat, an enemy fighter in a window directly overlooking the escape route. Her shot was true, eliminating the threat just as the soldier was raising his rifle. However, this left 2 other enemies in position to engage the moving soldiers. The second threat opened fire just as the soldiers were halfway across the rooftop. Maria could see the muzzle flashes and the dust being kicked up around her teammates' feet as bullets impacted near them. She shifted her aim and fired, but the angle was difficult and her shot went wide. The enemy fighter continued firing, forcing the soldiers to dive for cover behind a ventilation unit. With no time to waste, Maria fired again. This time, her bullet found its mark, silencing the enemy gun and allowing her teammates to continue their movement. They reached safety just as the third threat began firing from a more distant position. Maria's return shot forced the enemy fighter to take cover, preventing him from engaging the soldiers but not eliminating the threat entirely. 5 soldiers had now successfully made the crossing, but her ammunition was running critically low. She had 4 rounds remaining, and 7 soldiers still needed to escape. The mathematics were becoming increasingly unfavorable, and Maria knew she would need to make every shot count more than ever. The radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice, reporting that the escaped soldiers had established a defensive position in the adjacent building and were providing covering fire for the remaining evacuees. This additional firepower would help, but the enemy was also adapting to the new situation, repositioning their fighters to counter the changed tactical environment. The next soldier to move was Private Martinez, a young rifleman who had joined the unit just 2 months earlier. His inexperience showed as he hesitated at the window, clearly intimidated by the distance he would need to cover under fire. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with words of encouragement, reminding Martinez that his teammates were depending on him and that hesitation would only increase the danger. As Martinez finally began his movement, Maria spotted a new threat that she hadn't identified before. An enemy fighter had positioned himself in a concealed location among some rooftop debris, with a clear line of sight to the escape route. The fighter was patient, waiting for the perfect shot rather than revealing his position with premature fire. Maria's shot eliminated the threat just as Martinez reached the midpoint of his crossing. However, the young soldier's relief was short-lived, as another enemy fighter began engaging him from a different angle. This new threat was firing from a position that was difficult for Maria to target due to the angle in intervening structures. Martinez stumbled and fell as a bullet grazed his shoulder, but he continued moving towards safety. Maria could see blood on his uniform, but the wound didn't appear to be life-threatening. She fired at the enemy position, forcing the shooter to take cover, even though she couldn't achieve a direct hit due to the protective barriers. The wounded soldier reached safety just as Maria's ammunition count dropped to 2 rounds. 6 soldiers had successfully evacuated, but 6 more remained trapped, including Captain Rodriguez, who was refusing to leave until all his men were safe. The mathematics of the situation were becoming desperate, and Maria knew she would need to find a way to make her final shots protect multiple soldiers simultaneously. Through her scope, she could see enemy reinforcements arriving in the area, drawn by the sound of sustained gunfire and the obvious tactical importance of the engagement. Fresh fighters were taking positions that would allow them to engage both the trapped soldiers and the escape route simultaneously. The tactical balance was shifting against her teammates, and time was running out. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with a new plan. The remaining soldiers would move in 2 groups of 3, using coordinated timing to divide the enemy's attention. The first group would move immediately, while the second group would follow 30 seconds later. This would increase the chances of at least some soldiers reaching safety, even if Maria couldn't provide perfect cover for all of them. Maria positioned herself to cover the most dangerous threat, an enemy machine gunner who had established a position with a clear field of fire over the entire escape route. If she could eliminate this threat, it would significantly improve the chances of successful evacuation for both groups. However, the machine gunner was well concealed and protected by heavy cover that would require a precise shot to penetrate. As the first group of soldiers prepared to move, Maria steadied her breathing and focused on the machine gun position. She would have one chance to make the shot count, as revealing her position to fire would almost certainly draw return fire that her exposed rooftop position couldn't withstand for long. The soldiers began their movement, and the machine gun opened fire. Maria could see the muzzle flashes through a small gap in the protective barriers, and she fired without hesitation. Her bullet found its target, silencing the heavy weapon and eliminating the greatest threat to the escaping soldiers. However, her shot had revealed her position to several enemy fighters who immediately began engaging her location with small arms fire. Bullets cracked overhead and impacted the rooftop around her as she prepared for what might be her final shot. 1 round remained in her rifle, and 3 soldiers still needed to escape. The mathematical impossibility of the situation didn't deter Maria's determination. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to abandon her teammates now. As Captain Rodriguez led the final group of soldiers toward the window, Maria scanned for the most dangerous remaining threat. Knowing that her last shot would need to count more than any she had ever fired, the fate of 3 brave soldiers now rested in the hands of a young woman who had already performed miracles under impossible circumstances. The silent protector was about to fire her final shot in defense of the brothers who had entrusted their lives to her skills and courage. With only 1 round remaining and 3 soldiers still trapped, Maria faced an impossible tactical situation. Enemy fighters were closing in on her position, their return fire growing more accurate with each passing second. Concrete fragments showered around her as bullets struck the rooftop, and she knew that her time in this position was measured in minutes, not hours. Through her scope, she watched Captain Rodriguez preparing to lead the final escape attempt. The remaining soldiers were Private Jackson, a demolitions expert whose skills had saved the team multiple times during the deployment, and Private Williams, a communications specialist who had been working frantically to coordinate with the incoming air support. These 3 men represented years of training, irreplaceable experience, and most importantly to Maria, they were family. The captain's voice came through the radio one final time before the movement began. His words were calm and professional, but Maria could hear the weight of responsibility in his tone. He was asking his men to trust him with their lives, just as they had all trusted Maria to keep them safe during the longest hour of their military careers. As the 3 soldiers prepared to move, Maria made a tactical decision that went against every principle of sniper doctrine she had ever learned. Instead of trying to eliminate a specific threat with her final round, she would use it to create maximum chaos among the enemy forces at the moment her teammates were most vulnerable. The psychological impact of precise sniper fire at the right moment might be worth more than eliminating a single target. Captain Rodriguez appeared at the window first, pausing to assess the route one final time. Maria could see at least 4 enemy positions with clear lines of sight to the escape route, any one of which could prove fatal to the escaping soldiers. She chose the position that would provide the most visible example to the other enemy fighters, a sniper nest where she had seen movement indicating an active threat. As Rodriguez launched himself from the window and began his sprint across the exposed rooftop, Maria held her fire. She waited as Jackson followed, then Williams, allowing all three men to commit to the dangerous crossing before revealing her position with the final shot. The timing would need to be perfect, as the psychological impact would be greatest when the enemy fighters thought they had the escaping soldiers in their sights. The enemy sniper she had targeted raised his rifle to engage the moving soldiers, just as Maria squeezed her trigger for the last time. The bullet struck with devastating precision, eliminating the threat and sending a clear message to every other enemy fighter in the area that the mysterious sniper was still active and deadly accurate. The psychological effect was immediate and profound. Enemy fighters who had been preparing to engage the escaping soldiers suddenly hesitated, unsure whether they would be the next target of the unseen marksman. This momentary hesitation was all the time Captain Rodriguez and his men needed to reach the safety of the adjacent building. However, Maria's final shot had definitively revealed her position to the enemy forces, and their response was swift and overwhelming. At least a dozen fighters began pouring automatic weapons fire into her location, turning the rooftop into a deadly zone of flying concrete and ricocheting bullets. Her Barrett rifle was now empty, and she had no more ammunition to continue the fight. But her mission wasn't over yet. Even without ammunition, Maria could still serve as a distraction, drawing enemy attention away from her successfully evacuated teammates. She began moving across the rooftop, using whatever cover was available to avoid the increasingly accurate enemy fire, while maintaining the illusion that she was still an active threat. The radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice, now transmitted from the safety of the adjacent building. All 12 soldiers had successfully reached the evacuation point, with only minor wounds that could be treated until proper medical evacuation arrived. The mission that had seemed doomed just hours earlier was now a success, thanks entirely to Maria's extraordinary marksmanship and unwavering dedication. However, Maria's own situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Enemy fighters were now moving to assault her position directly, and without ammunition, she had no way to defend herself against a coordinated ground attack. Her handgun contained 15 rounds, which might allow her to defend herself briefly, but against the numbers she was facing, it would only delay the inevitable. It was then that the distinctive sound of rotor blades began echoing through the urban canyon. The air support that Corporal Kim had requested was finally arriving, having navigated the complex approval process and flight time required for close air support in an urban environment. Two attack helicopters appeared over the cityscape, their weapon systems already trained on the enemy positions that Maria had been engaging throughout the morning. The helicopter's arrival changed the tactical situation dramatically. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently toward Maria's position suddenly found themselves exposed to devastating firepower from above. The psychological effect of air support in urban combat was often as important as the actual weapons, and the enemy forces began withdrawing from their exposed positions immediately. Maria used the confusion caused by the helicopter's arrival to begin her own extraction from the compromised position. Moving carefully across the rooftop, she made her way toward a stairwell that would allow her to reach ground level and begin moving toward her teammate's position. Enemy fighters were too busy dealing with the air threat to focus on a single sniper who was no longer actively engaging them. The extraction was complicated by the ongoing firefight between the helicopters and the remaining enemy forces. Bullets flew in all directions as enemy fighters attempted to engage the aircraft with small arms fire, an largely futile but desperate effort to drive off the air support. Maria had to time her movements carefully to avoid being caught in the crossfire between the helicopters and the enemy positions. As she reached the building's stairwell, Maria could hear the distinctive sound of her teammates' voices coming through the radio. They were coordinating with the helicopter crews to ensure that their extraction route was clear of friendly forces before the aircraft began their most aggressive attacks. The professionalism and calm demeanor in their voices was a testament to the quality of soldiers she had been protecting throughout the morning. Making her way down the stairwell, Maria reflected on the morning's events. She had fired 39 rounds and achieved what she conservatively estimated to be 35 successful hits, an accuracy rate that would have been impressive under training conditions and was remarkable under the stress of actual combat. More importantly, she had accomplished her primary mission of keeping her teammates alive against overwhelming odds. The ground floor of the building showed significant damage from the ongoing firefight. Windows were shattered, walls were pockmarked with bullet holes, and debris littered the floor. Maria moved carefully through the destruction, maintaining awareness of her surroundings while making her way toward the building where her teammates had taken refuge. As she reached the building's exit, Maria could see that the helicopters had been devastatingly effective in neutralizing the remaining enemy threats. Bodies and abandoned equipment were scattered throughout the area that had been teeming with hostile fighters just minutes earlier. The air support had arrived at exactly the right moment to prevent what could have been a disaster for the extraction operation. The final sprint to her teammates' building was the most dangerous part of Maria's own extraction. Despite the helicopter support, isolated enemy fighters might still be in position to engage a lone soldier, moving across open ground. She moved quickly but carefully, using whatever cover was available, while maintaining awareness of potential threats from multiple directions. When Maria finally reached the building where her teammates had taken refuge, she was greeted with cheers and congratulations from soldiers who understood exactly what she had accomplished. Captain Rodriguez shook her hand with obvious emotion, while the wounded soldiers she had protected expressed their gratitude for her life-saving intervention. However, the mission wasn't completely over yet. The soldiers still needed to reach a secure landing zone where they could be evacuated by helicopter, and the route to that location presented its own challenges. Enemy forces in the area had been disrupted but not completely eliminated, and there was always the possibility of encountering additional threats during the movement to the extraction point. The helicopter crews were coordinating with ground forces to establish a secure perimeter around the planned landing zone, but Maria and her teammates would need to move approximately 1 kilometer through potentially hostile territory to reach safety. With their ammunition running low and several wounded soldiers in the group, the journey would test their endurance and tactical skills one final time. As the team prepared for the final phase of their extraction, Maria checked her handgun and the small amount of ammunition she had remaining. The Barrett rifle had served its purpose magnificently, but now she would need to rely on different weapons and tactics for whatever challenges lay ahead. The Silent Protector's watch was not yet complete. The journey to the extraction point began with the team moving in tactical formation through the war-torn streets of the city. Captain Rodriguez took point, followed by the walking wounded who were supported by their stronger teammates. Maria positioned herself at the rear of the formation, her eyes constantly scanning for threats that might emerge from the rubble-strewn landscape around them. The helicopter crews had done excellent work in clearing the immediate area, but urban warfare had taught every soldier the importance of maintaining vigilance even in seemingly secure zones. Enemy fighters could emerge from basements, hidden rooms, or previously cleared buildings with little warning. The psychological stress of believing you were safe, only to face sudden attack, could be devastating to unit cohesion and individual morale. As they moved through the first intersection, Maria noticed movement in a second-story window approximately 50 meters to their left. Through her training and instincts, she could distinguish between the movement patterns of civilians trying to stay hidden and fighters preparing to engage. This movement had the deliberate quality that suggested hostile intent rather than fearful civilians. Without breaking stride, Maria signaled the potential threat to Captain Rodriguez, who immediately adjusted the formation to provide better cover and fields of fire. The team's response was automatic and coordinated, a testament to the training and experience that had kept them alive through multiple deployments. Every soldier understood his role in the formation and executed it without the need for detailed instructions. The suspected enemy position revealed itself when a rifle barrel appeared in the window, clearly targeting the moving soldiers. Maria's handgun was already in her hands, and her shots were precise despite the awkward shooting position required by movement. The threat was neutralized quickly and quietly, allowing the team to continue their movement without attracting additional attention from other potential enemies in the area. Sergeant Thompson, despite his injuries, maintained the team's medical readiness during the movement. His wound had been stabilized with field dressings, but he continued to monitor the other wounded soldiers for signs of deteriorating condition. The combination of adrenaline, blood loss, and physical exertion could quickly overcome soldiers who appeared stable in a defensive position but struggled with sustained movement. As the team reached the halfway point to the extraction zone, they encountered their most serious challenge since leaving the building. A group of enemy fighters had established a hasty roadblock using an overturned vehicle and debris, creating a choke point that the team would need to either assault directly or bypass through more dangerous terrain. Captain Rodriguez called a halt to assess the situation and coordinate with the helicopter crews for possible fire support. However, the roadblock was positioned in an area where civilian casualties were possible, limiting the options for airstrikes. The team would need to handle this threat using their own resources and tactical skills. Maria studied the roadblock through her field glasses, counting at least 6 enemy fighters in defensive positions behind the overturned vehicle. Their weapons included automatic rifles and what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, which posed a significant threat to the helicopters if they attempted close support. The enemy had chosen their position well, creating a tactical problem that would require careful planning to overcome. The team had limited ammunition remaining, and a direct assault on a prepared position would likely result in casualties they couldn't afford. Maria suggested a flanking maneuver that would allow her to engage the enemy position from an unexpected angle, while the rest of the team provided a distraction from their current location. Her plan involved moving through a partially collapsed building to reach a position where she could engage the enemy fighters from their vulnerable flank. The approach would be dangerous, requiring her to move alone through potentially unstable terrain, but it offered the best chance of neutralizing the threat without sustaining casualties. Captain Rodriguez approved the plan after confirming that the helicopter crews could provide covering fire if the flanking maneuver went wrong. Maria checked her remaining ammunition one final time, verified her communication equipment, and began the dangerous solo movement that would either clear the path to safety or result in her being cut off from her teammates. Moving through the collapsed building required all of Maria's urban warfare training. Unstable debris could shift without warning, creating noise that would alert the enemy to her movement or causing structural collapse that could trap or injure her. She moved slowly and deliberately, testing each step before committing her full weight to potentially unstable surfaces. The route through the building took her past evidence of the devastating urban combat that had raged through this area in previous weeks. Blast holes in walls, scattered equipment, and abandoned positions told the story of fierce fighting between forces competing for control of strategic locations. Maria had seen similar devastation in other cities, but it never failed to remind her of the human cost of warfare. As she reached the position she had identified for engaging the roadblock, Maria could see that the enemy fighters were alert, but focused on the direction from which they expected an attack. Their positioning was tactically sound for defending against a frontal assault, but it left them vulnerable to fire from the flank where Maria was now positioned. Through her handgun sights, Maria could see all 6 enemy fighters clearly. Her remaining ammunition would allow her to engage each target once, but there would be no margin for error. Each shot would need to be precisely placed to ensure immediate neutralization of the threat, as wounded fighters could still return fire and potentially alert other enemy forces in the area. Maria's first shot eliminated the enemy fighter with the RPG launcher, removing the greatest threat to the helicopters and her teammates. The enemy response was immediate but confused, as they couldn't immediately identify the direction from which the shot had come. This confusion bought Maria precious seconds to engage additional targets before the enemy could coordinate their response. Her second and third shots eliminated the enemy fighters who appeared to be leaders based on their positioning and the equipment they carried. Leadership targets were always high priority in tactical situations, as their elimination often resulted in the collapse of enemy unit cohesion and effectiveness. The remaining 3 enemy fighters began returning fire in Maria's general direction, but their shots were poorly aimed due to their inability to precisely locate her position. Maria's 4th shot eliminated the fighter with the best position to engage her teammates, while her 5th shot forced another enemy to take cover behind inadequate protection. With only 1 round remaining in her handgun, Maria faced the same tactical challenge that had defined her entire morning. 1 bullet, 1 remaining threat, and the safety of her teammates hanging in the balance. The mathematical impossibility of the situation had become a recurring theme, but Maria had already proved that determination and skill could overcome seemingly hopeless odds. Her final shot was her most important, eliminating the last enemy fighter and clearing the roadblock completely. Captain Rodriguez immediately led the team through the now safe passage, and within minutes they could hear the sound of helicopter rotors growing louder as they approached the designated landing zone. The extraction point was a small clearing that had been secured by advanced elements of a relief force. Medical personnel were waiting to treat the wounded soldiers, while intelligence officers prepared to debrief the team about the morning's operations. The sight of friendly faces and professional medical care was a profound relief after hours of combat stress and uncertainty. As Maria watched her teammates receiving medical attention and preparing for evacuation, she reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them all to safety. What had started as a routine mission had become a desperate fight for survival, and only the combination of training, teamwork, and individual courage had prevented disaster. The helicopter crews reported that their post-mission analysis had identified 37 enemy casualties in the immediate area of the morning's engagement, confirming the effectiveness of Maria's marksmanship and the tactical impact of her intervention. More importantly, all 12 members of her unit were alive and would be returning home to their families. Captain Rodriguez approached Maria as they waited for their evacuation helicopter, his expression reflecting the gratitude that he struggled to put into words. The bonds forged in combat created relationships that transcended normal military hierarchy, and the captain understood that he owed his life and the lives of his men to Maria's extraordinary performance under impossible circumstances. The helicopter that would carry them to safety appeared on the horizon as the sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows in the urban landscape that had witnessed such violence and courage. As Maria prepared to board the aircraft that would take her away from this battlefield, she knew that the morning's events would stay with her for the rest of her life. The young woman from East Los Angeles had become something more than a soldier or a sniper during those desperate hours. She had become the guardian angel watching over 12 brave men. The silent protector whose steady hands and unwavering courage had turned certain death into miraculous survival. Her last shots had indeed rescued a trapped platoon. But more than that, they had demonstrated the extraordinary things that ordinary people can accomplish when they refuse to abandon those who depend on them. Years later, when military historians studied the engagement, they would struggle to explain how one sniper had accomplished so much with so little. The technical aspects of her shooting were impressive, but they missed the deeper truth about what had happened that morning. It wasn't just about marksmanship or tactics or even courage, though all of those played crucial roles. It was about love. The profound connection between soldiers who have shared danger and hardship, and the lengths to which people will go to protect those they consider family. Maria Vasquez returned home to a hero's welcome and commendations that recognized her extraordinary service, but she always insisted that she had simply done what any soldier would do for their teammates. In her mind, there had never been a choice to abandon her brothers in arms, and the remarkable shooting that saved their lives was simply the natural expression of her commitment to the bonds that united them all. The silent protector's watch had ended, but the story of her courage would inspire generations of soldiers who understood that sometimes, when everything seems lost and the odds are impossible, one person's refusal to surrender can change everything. In those final minutes of an urban siege, Maria's last shots had not just rescued 12 soldiers. They had demonstrated the very best of human nature under the very worst of circumstances.